Hello, and welcome to the Potential State. My name is Dr. Assael Romanelli, and today I'm going to talk about the idea of can the apple fall far from the tree? And I'm going to be combining two different theories. One is the idea of family scripts, brought to us by byng-hall, who wrote this amazing book called Rewriting Family Scripts, which unfortunately I can't show you the cover. Amazing book. And this other idea of intergenerational transmission of traditions, of rituals, of trauma, of limitations. I'll end this episode with some tips and ways which you can reflect, expand, and change the repertoire which you inherited. So basically, family life is a rehearsal for the next generation. We're just another chain in a long, long necklace of a life of inheritance that we've been passed on to, and we will pass on to our children. And the way we organize and the gift we give our kids basically is these scripts, a family script. A script is a way of how do we do things? What's our role? What do we do? What do we say? What do we don't do? What do we don't say? And it is a family's shared expectation of how life should be. And scripts can go anywhere from small of like how do we wash the dishes to how do we fight to what is intimacy to how do we celebrate life or holidays to how do we choose partners, to what do we learn, to how do we educate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what actually connects generations, right? What's being passed on are these scripts, and these scripts are traditions and our heritage. So John byng-hall in his book talks about three types of scripts. The first one is the replicative script, where I'm replicating scripts that I've seen in my family of origin, whether I'm doing it consciously or unconsciously. It could be anything from, I'll give a small example. I grew up in my house. There's two garbage bags. There's the big garbage bag, and then there's inside of it, there's like a supermarket plastic bag. And you dump it in, and you actually take the supermarket bag, you close it, and you throw that one away. And that way you reuse the supermarket plastic bag, and you don't waste the big, expensive garbage bags. Now, that's a repetitive script. I never even thought about that. That seemed normal to me. In fact, the only time I really reflected that it's something that's peculiar or different or specific is when I married Galit and we moved in together. And she told me, why do you have two bags in the garbage bag? And I couldn't even understand why she asked me that. It's obvious that there's going to be two bags. That's called a replicative script. I was replicating it. A lot of times these replicative scripts, or I'm going to call them repetitive scripts, if that's okay, are actually unconscious. I just do it because that's what I know. Because when I close my eyes and think of how you wash the dishes, or how do you fight, or how do you show affection, I'm going to think of the models I saw at home, of the scripts that were modeled and were transmitted to me. So that's repetitive scripts or replicative scripts. The second kind of scripts are corrective scripts, are scripts where I choose or I vow that I will do things different than the way I was brought up. So if my parents were very harsh, I'm going to be very open. If in our house we did not talk about sex, my house, we're going to be open. Everything's going to be on the table. Our house, we weren't really religious. I really want us to be religious. I'm going to go to the opposite. I'm going to correct it. I'm going to go the opposite way. And the problem with corrective scripts is when they're taken to the extreme, they're basically the same thing as the replicative scripts. It's more of the same, right? So the very strict parent who chooses to be very loose with his kids, at the end of the day, if he takes it to the extreme, in both cases, he's not attuned to the child's needs, okay? Or people that move to the other side of the world, or people that change in extreme measures to kind of rebel against their parents. The irony is they keep repeating the same scripts. Okay, so we have replicative scripts, we have corrective scripts, and the third type is improvised scripts. Now, improvised scripts are scripts that weren't handed down. They're new, they're fresh, they're 2019. And they usually come out of either curiosity, I'm curious what's going to happen, or necessity. Either there's a development, there's an involvement called technology or any other situations, or I just kind of tired of doing the same thing, or I feel like we're getting stuck in the same loop. And what happens is when you meet a partner, you kind of unconsciously, each one of you just throwing on the table, here's my repetitive scripts, and here's my corrective scripts. And my partner's doing the same, and all these cards are on the table, all these scripts. And now as a pair, as a couple, we're trying to kind of choose which scripts we're going to repeat, which one we're going to correct, and which ones we're going to end up improvising. Usually this whole negotiation is unconscious, is implicit, and we don't really realize that. And a lot of our fights and conflicts are fights between opposing scripts, my scripts and my partner's scripts. So I want to give a few examples of this, and then I'm going to connect this to another idea. So I gave you an example of of a repetitive script, right? The two garbage bags. I'm going to give an example of a corrective script. So a corrective script, it would be when our son entered first grade, we had to choose a school. Now, my elementary school was beautiful, and I wanted to repeat that. It had just the right sense of values and community and everything I wanted. But for my wife, who had a rougher experience in elementary school, she wanted a corrective script. She was like anything but that type of school. And we had a lot of clashes because we wanted different things, but we were activated from different types of scripts. So that's an example of a clash of a repetitive script with a corrective script and how do they meet. I want to give you an example of an improvised script. An improvised script, for instance, in our family, if you go back to the two garbage bags, is compost. In my day, when I grew up, there were no composts in Israel. No one thought about it. No one knew what it was. So when the time came and it was introduced in Jerusalem, I was like, yeah, let's do this. But we didn't really know how. I never had that. I don't know how it is to separate organic waste, and neither did my wife, Khalid. And we had to kind of find our way. There were no scripts. When I closed my eyes, I had no visual of how to do that. And something about improvised scripts, you have to maintain a certain level of uncertainty because you're going into no man's land. What's going to happen? Who's in charge of it? What's my role? Am I in charge of that? So having a car, okay, we both know how that grew up, and who's in charge of the car, who's going to take it to the garage, who's going to clean it, who's going to do the laundry, who's going to fold the laundry. But certainly there's new things, internet, Wi-Fi, WhatsApp, compost, all kinds of different things. So now I want to connect it to another concept called intergenerational transmission, which basically means we unconsciously transmit to our children things that we experienced, that we inherited. And what I'm noticing a lot in the clinic is it usually happens around ages or topics that were sensitive to us. I want to give two examples. A few years ago, I was working with a family, and the kid was 13 years old, and he called himself the Destructor. And he was just acting out. He was doing lots of terrible things. He was stealing money, and he burned the warehouse down, and he was just a nightmare. And when we started asking, like, the parents, why did you come now? So the father said, when I was 13, that's when I got my first bicycle, and that changed my life. I became independent and athletic. I finally traveled by myself. And so age 13 for that father was a very big year that he transitioned from being a boy to being a man. And when his son reaches 13, and he's not doing that transition, by the contrary, he's actually becoming more childish, more immature, that's when they hit therapy. So as you can see, that age is encrypted in his dad, is like imprinted in the father, that when you hit 13, something changes, and your son slowly is getting 8, 9, 10 years old, 11, 12. Once they get to 13, you're like, ooh, and that's when they usually come to therapy. I'll give a different example. A while back, a couple came to me that this big fight over whether their teenage daughter should go on a delegation abroad. Mom said, over my dead body, it's either her or me. Very big drama over this. And I didn't understand, why is that such a big deal? So then I asked, what happened to you when you were 16? So she says, at 16, I left home. I moved in with a boyfriend who I didn't really love, ended up marrying him and divorcing him 2 years later. And even though she said to herself she won't do that, that won't be her story, she ends up repeating it. Now, in this case, it's an intergenerational transmission, but you can also see this as sort of a repetitive script, almost like they're saying at 16, you need to get so pissed off that you're going to do something dramatic. Because it's clear to both parents that not letting her go on this delegation is going to be a very big rupture in their family life. Or another example of a different client I was working with, and she grew up with a housewife and an aggressive father. And her mom never got an education, never had a career, never went for it. And she vowed to herself, I will not be like my mom. Corrective script, right? I will go the opposite. And she dedicated the 20 years after she graduated to be the best manager in this big, big firm that she was working with. And she peaked. She comes 30 years later, right, 10 years into her marriage, and realized that she replicated her parents' marriage. Ironically, she's alone, unseen, unappreciated. So she managed to do a corrective script on careers for women in her family, but she's doing a replicative script about intimacy in marriages and how does a marriage look like. And many times that's what's happened, right? I'm sure I'm going to a corrective script only to realize I've actually replicated the specific thing I was trying to run away from. And I want to say something about, like, I want to give another example of intergenerational transmission. When I graduated my undergrad degree, I went to London to become an emissary. And I was working in a Jewish community there. And I realized as I was flying that's what my dad did. I mean, my mom at that age, that's when she went to America, to Washington. That's when she met my dad. I was semi-conscious that I'm a very similar age, like she was when she went. And I was single at the time. So I was like, wow, I might meet here. How cool would that be? That's what I was thinking then, because I didn't know these concepts, that I would meet my wife at the same age when I was abroad. And ended up meeting a woman who really felt familiar. In fact, she felt so familiar that my aunt said, she really reminds me of your mom. Now, luckily, that didn't work out. So then I ended up marrying Galit, who's amazing. But just notice how deep that was. I was semi-conscious of it, but actually I wasn't really conscious of it. So as you can see, these are scripts. This goes into our DNA, our emotional DNA, our spiritual, our psychological DNA. And it's very, very powerful. And many times we think we're liberated from them. People move across to the other side of the world. They change religion. They become religious. They change locations. They move away. I had one client who said, I'm always 2 area codes away from my parents, right? She's trying to run away because she's feeling like they're taking over. The replicative script is unavoidable. But as we know, is like you can't run away from those. Family scripts don't go away. All we can do is shape them a little bit, soften them, work them, improvise them a little bit so we can hand over to the next generation a more improvised script. And I want to give a few tips now on what you can do to soften, alternate, maybe leverage different scripts that you have, whether you are in a relationship or not. In both cases, you're still running a script. By the way, if you're single and you have a script, there's also scripts of how to be single. In our family, what does love mean? What does relationship mean? What type of partner are you looking for? How do you present yourself? In our family, what is honorable? In our family, what do we talk about? All these things are scripts, right? These are core beliefs. These are glasses that you were inherited on which you see the world. And they make sense and they tell you what to do. So on one hand, they lower anxiety because you know what to do in social situations, in intimate situations, in romantic situations, in parenting situations, in political situations, elections, voting, whatever. But at the end of the day, that's also limiting you. So you can't run away from it, but you can at least be aware of it, own it, and then try to change that. So the first thing I want to recommend is take a piece of paper and write down scripts that you have, the corrective scripts and the repetitive scripts that you have, and maybe also improvised. So one would be like, what do I do that is similar or exactly the same as what I saw at home, whether I'm doing it consciously or unconsciously? Once again, from the garbage bags and up. Then another column, do what's corrective? What am I consciously trying to do opposite, or maybe unconsciously, but I can see I'm really going the opposite. There's usually, it's a corrective script, there's usually like a little, I gotta do it, like a little rigidness there almost. And the third column, you can say, what's an improvised script that there's no background, there's no history to it, there's no precedent. And once you do all these 3 scripts, see which ones, circle the ones you like and the ones you don't like. Like, for instance, for me, the repetitive script of the double garbage bag, I love it. I think it's environmental. I think it makes sense. It's cost effective. I don't want to change that. But there's other scripts that I would like to change. So I'm circling the ones I want, the ones I don't. And the ones you want to change, think about, can I maintain the uncertainty that will require to change them, to improvise them, basically. So I'm taking a corrective script or a repetitive script. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to say, wait, I'm going to try something different, whether it's by myself or with my partner or with my friends, colleagues, whatever. That's going to necessitate me being able to hold on to myself within an uncertain moment. And if you refer back to the systematic change, if that is a second order change, then people that are used to my script are going to resist. I remember when I came back from London, not with that woman, but I decided I want to teach improv. So I remember my parents saying, how can you teach improv in a dance school? You never studied dance, right? So they were basically saying, in our family, you only teach what you learned. You cannot improvise. You cannot go somewhere different. Or in our family, art is a hobby. You cannot actually make a living out of it. So I had to basically try to do some sort of corrective script, but it was mostly improvised because once I started, I had no idea what to do. I had to develop my own script of how to become a teacher, how to be paid for your art, how to see art as a calling and not just as a hobby. So perhaps the impetus was a corrective script, but the actually carrying it out was an improvised script. So going back to that, so you choose the scripts that you're not really happy with, that you feel are limiting you or are making your relationship smaller or more rigid or making yourself unhappy or small or constructed or constricted. And then once you have that, compare that with, try to investigate different ages in your parents' life and in your life that were key, that were moments where you got up and left, where your parents experienced some sort of trauma or loss, or maybe a very positive growth. So for instance, when I was 2 years old, my parents, we all moved to America for 3 years. Okay, so when my kids were 2, I was aware of that. I was trying to be aware of that. Okay, something's going to happen. There's going to be a shift now. Okay, so it's almost holding in your mind key ages, key moments, or key topics that you know are very, very sensitive and holding those on, holding them in your mind. So when your kids reach that age or when you reach the age that your parents, just like I was semi-aware that when I was going to London to actually replicate my mom's story, that it doesn't necessitate that I will find my partner there. It doesn't have to be the same story. And that's okay. In fact, maybe that's also preferable, assuming it's an improvised script. You do not have to do what the script tells you to do. You can say, thank you, but I want to improvise my own script. It's easier said than done, obviously. And I guess, as I say in every single talk, you got to own your shit. You got to be conscious and re-examine your scripts. You're not that original. You didn't invent everything, all your behavior patterns and your relationship patterns. You've inherited a lot of it. So look at it, examine it, take ownership of it, and then you have a choice. And since scripts never go away, so I guess what I'm suggesting is better choose or be mindful when you're choosing your replicative scripts. Try to manage the corrective scripts that you do and try to approach life or approach relationships or approach your behavior in a more playful, improvised way so you can maybe generate improvised scripts that can soften or heal a little bit of the trauma that you've inherited and maybe give your kids a more open and wide and adaptive scripts for their journey. And hopefully, if we do this in our families, we can actually release some of the corrective and replicative scripts of our families, our tribes, our communities, our nations. And hopefully we can liberate this world from a world of a lot of moving between replicative and corrective scripts of violence and war and anger and hate and bigotry and sexism and racism. So instead of moving between one polarity of replicating it to correcting it, what are the improvised scripts that we can move forward, that we can open up? But for that, we're going to have to hold on to ourselves and realize that we're stepping into no man's land, into uncertainty. No one's done this before. And with that, we're kind of paving a new path for the rehearsal for the next generation. And I guess that's all we can do, right? Is pave improvised path to the next generation from our adaptive scripts. So can the apple fall far from the tree? Perhaps. But the apple needs to be very, very conscious of it. So I'm Dr. Assael Romanelli, and this was The Potential State. I'll see you next time.